Okay. Oh, someone's already in the waiting room. Audio. Cheers. Oh, there you go. Top. Hello.
Hello. Sorry, I'm gonna get some water.
All right, you're sorted.
All right, I think I'm set.
This is my water bottle. Oh. Wait.
Guys, I'm just getting myself organized here. Hello. So you're Martin, right? Okay. I don't think I've like officially met you individually. So I think the plan is I have like half a dozen slides of some info. And so what I thought I would do is just kind of go through that as like a little bit of context for whoever comes. And then I can invite you guys to like introduce yourselves, maybe, share a little, 1 minute blurb on like how you kind of approached applying to grad school, that kind of thing, and we can kind of put it up.
It's awesome.
Hi, you're Dylan,
Yeah.
Is that right? You choose which person. And hello, Dylan.
We sit in the front lines.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, we could sit, and then once I go through them, then you could turn around.
Move up. Yeah. Oh, look at that. So. No bias at all. we got plants and scholarships. Not really a plant person.
You're not?
Well, plants, microbes.
Oh,
I like to refer to duckies as the microbes.
I think it got sent out in the announcement.
Are you letting people in the waiting room?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to disable the waiting room?
Good idea. Okay. So, if you can, or if you give me your email,
I'm
sure.
gonna disable the waiting room.
Thank you, Jesse.
I don't know if you.
I think you might have to decide it before you start editing.
Oh,
yeah.
there we go. Awesome. And you don't have to deal with. People being right.
I can't be you anyways. Okay.
All right, I guess we'll get started in just a minute. We're exactly at noon. I figure I'll give folks a few minutes to come in case they're coming from class.
Did you want it on this
Oh,
slide?
no.
Hopefully, in a week. Bargaining.
I think I'm really jump scared this morning when I saw them like announce them for the EPs and and I saw the image. That's the first thing, and I was like, it's not today. I still have a week, right?
But it's the next one that's coming up.
Yeah, no, I forgot about the whole synthesis today. Yeah, no, and so no, but I looked at it, I was like, I swear I jumped out right today. If it's today, people are not getting a talk. Next Friday.
1:15.
12:20.
12:20.
Yeah.
That one. So it's the wrong time. But yours is because it's after this is.
Yeah, so they have to have like that 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah, no, Helen put in like both with like asterisks. Which I'm gonna start talking to them, there's gonna be banging in the hallway. Yeah. Cause then there's an exit seminar. And then
Who's
we start
leaving?
on post off.
What? No, you check me. I could just.
I already have. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Then Sherry is next.
Yeah.
Then we have our post off talks starting.
Mhm.
Next week. Super excited. Jacob goes, then Tim is.
Right, Rob hasn't done his appraisal. I thought he did.
No, Rob still needs to get those. And then Maya's next.
Is there one lab that disproportionately gets the same figures?
Sorry,
Is there one lab that disproportionately gets the same figures?
I feel like this year,
It's like all.
John has invited so many people.
Because he's like part of the, is it the ecology thing?
Yes, and also I think he just.
Well, I mean, well, in our first year, it was like, I mean, like a lot of invited, but like he had.
Yeah, that, I know.
We'll just get started in just a minute.
And now, it's on a Friday, and there's a faculty meeting, but the somehow business. Is Megan's trying to finalize the date. Question. I think I know this one. Sure. Are we getting a new Amy? Have they started?
I'm not sure if they've started for it or not yet.
Okay.
Amy got a new job, great job, yeah,
What's she doing?
she's in which
Religion?
department?
Religion.
We'll miss her.
A lot. Everyone has left.
I don't like change.
I want to.
Oh.
Okay, I think we might as well get started, and then if any other folks trickle in, that's fine. I'm going to record it.
Oh, it's been recorded.
Oh, it is.
Already going.
It's better. Okay, so,
Our conversation.
anyway, so I'll introduce, so I'm Asher Cutter. I'm a professor here at U of T in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department. I also happen to be the associate chair for the graduate program of our department, which kind of organizes how the master's and PhD programs work. And so what we thought we'd do today is I run through just a handful of kind of context of stuff that's relevant to applying to graduate school or starting to think about that. It's going to be kind of a little bit focused on how it works for why you might come into our department, but many of the things actually are relevant to other departments at U of T and even other universities altogether. We're also lucky to have 4 of our current graduate students here who will kind of open things up to kind of Q&A once I kind of run through a little bit of background context. So if you've got questions or things about what it's like for a grad experience or want to get a little bit of insight from people who have been in your shoes very recently, they're, I think, great folks to help with that. So I'll introduce them in a little bit. But yeah, I'll do that once you can kind of turn around and see them. So, and folks that are online, feel free to plug any questions in the chat and I'll try and be monitoring that and I can pull those up too. Okay, so U of T is kind of unusual in that we don't just have one biology department. We actually have many biology departments. The Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department is the only such department in Canada. But there's also our sister department, Cell and Systems Biology. There's a number of life science departments in the Faculty of Medicine as well, and they all run different graduate programs. Our program, EEB, also is kind of unusual in the context of some universities in that it's a tri-campus graduate program. So at the undergrad level, you know that basically each of the 3 U of T campuses, St. George, Mississauga, and Scarborough, are more or less independent at the undergrad level. But at the graduate level, we actually share all our faculty with expertise in those areas. And so we have over 50 research faculty spread across those 3. About half or a little over half of them are based here at the downtown St. George campus. And they help to mentor about 150 graduate students in our program. So, I mean, these guys can tell you a little bit more about that, but even if you have a faculty research supervisor at one of the 3 campuses, you can have a thesis committee member that's on any of the 3 campuses to get their expertise. And I can tell you more about that as well. I should also say that the natural history curators at the Royal Ontario Museum also have faculty appointments in our department here at U of T. And so they can serve as research supervisors for graduate work as well. And we also have some adjunct faculty that actually have a primary appointment in a government agency like the Ministry of Natural Resources or Fisheries and Oceans. I'll get into what fully funded means in a little bit, but one thing that also is pretty different from education at the undergraduate level and versus at the graduate level in the sciences is that if you're doing a research-based program in the sciences, typically you're actually paid to be a student trainee versus just solely paying tuition. And so we have funded programs for both master's and PhD level programs. And the idea of what you do is really your main focus is not so much on coursework like it is in the undergrad level. There are a handful of courses that you have to take in graduate school, but most of your time is actually devoted to doing an independent research project where you develop a thesis. And that's mentored by an individual or pair of supervisors, professors. And then another kind of key element is that it's very specialized in a way in that you also have the support of typically 2 or maybe 3 additional faculty members that serve on your supervisory committee that have complementary expertise and help give you advice both as it relates to research projects as well as professional development and things like that. So I think these guys will be able to speak to this a little bit more, but I think we have a pretty great and supportive group of graduate students in our department, and that's definitely one feature that makes it a pretty nice environment in which to kind of pursue education. So there's a whole slew of research concentrations that range both in kind of the technical aspects of what people do to also the conceptual aspects. So whether you're interested in kind of thinking about kind of the biodiversity of organisms or how you can have that a slightly more applied context in conservation, to studying things related to disease and epidemiology, to thinking about the ecology of communities or ecosystems, or more kind of microscopically thinking about genetics and genomes and molecular evolution or behavior and neurobiology, or actually not even working with live organisms at all, but kind of thinking about things in an abstract way using mathematical models or computational approaches. Those are all covered by graduate students in our program. Okay, so I mentioned that we have these programs that are fully funded. So what are they? We have a Master of Science program. It's quite abbreviated and short. It's only 16 months is the expected time to try and complete that. There's only you only have to do a single course during that time, a single 0.5 FCE. The rest of it is meant to be devoted towards your thesis topic. The master's program here that we have is only available to Canadian citizens and permanent residents. So unfortunately, for international students, that's not an option. It is a research-based program, so that means that students receive an annual stipend. And so that's different from, say, some other programs that might be a quote professional program, which is totally course-based. And typically, you're just paying to be in that to get your certification or degree rather than receiving a stipend. So we also have a doctoral program. Technically, there are a couple of ways to enter that. So assuming that you guys are all undergraduates, the typical way if you came straight from undergrad would be what's called a direct entry PhD, which has 5 years of guaranteed funding support and requires 2 FCE worth of coursework over that full period of time. So you can see the balance between coursework and research stuff is pretty different from your undergrad experience. The other kind of way you can, that commonly students may enter is if you first do a master's degree, either here at U of T or somewhere else, and then decide you want to do a PhD degree, then you can enter, and that is typically funded for 4 years. There are both international as well as domestic spots for the doctoral program. And I'm happy to say as of this year, our department actually has the highest stipend levels of any department at U of T. And so to put it in context, so out of the typically what happens if you're admitted as a graduate student, as part of your kind of offer of admission, it's indicated that you'll be guaranteed a stipend for a certain period of time. And so for doctoral students, that works out to, I think about $42,000 or $43,000 per year, out of which you have to pay like the $8,000 or $9,000 tuition. So like to cover your living expenses and things like that, you're talking about $34,000 a year. And for master's students, the take home is about $30,000. So unfortunately, for better or worse, how that money all comes together is actually a little bit convoluted. We try not to make it too complicated for students when they come in, but just so you have a vague notion, the money basically comes from provincially provided funds to the university that then get dispersed to students. We're lucky that our department has a number of endowed scholarships and that are kind of bursaries, so kind of need-based scholarships, and those get dispersed to graduate students as part of their stipends. The thing you're probably most familiar with is part of that package relates to being a teaching assistant. So whenever you take a lab course or something like that, or interact with a TA, in an EEB course, they're typically one of our graduate students. And so part of your kind of training as a graduate student is learning how to teach other people core ideas in the discipline. And so that's kind of part of that training, also in terms of thinking about public speaking and other kinds of skills. I should say that the teaching assistantship actually is a pretty small commitment in terms of hours relative to many other institutions. So here, the teaching assistants are unionized, and so it's very prescripted how many hours they devote to it. So typically, it would be 70 hours per term. So that should be like 5 or 6 hours a week that's devoted to TA work. That contrasts, so like when I was a graduate student, I did my PhD in the United States, and a TA was 20 hours per week. So it's a substantially different ballpark, which I hope is good for our students. So keep that in mind if you are considering thinking about graduate school in other places, like what the TA commitment is. You have a question?
Yeah. My friend's older sister, she's in a master's program in a different department, but she didn't get like a teaching assistant spot. And I'm wondering, like, how does it work for this? Like, are you guaranteed a teaching assistant spot? Like, is part of the stipend that you're getting coming out of that? Like, if you don't get a spot, you get less money? Like,
yeah, we're obliged to offer spots. And in fact, in our department, we have more need for TA positions than we actually have graduate students to fill them. So like, you guys have taken Bio 120, right? You know how big that course is and how many labs there are. And oftentimes we actually have to hire TAs that are grad students in other departments to help fill that. So that's not a worry in our case. So the last piece that's probably like the least familiar to you for how the finances work are that whoever you have as your research supervisor, a part of your funding will come off of their grant. So it's a research assistantship. It's not to kind of do their bidding, but it's their kind of contribution to your shared investment in your research project, because it usually aligns with the general research theme of the lab of the supervisor you're working with. Okay, so probably you've thought about why you might want to pursue graduate training. That's why you're sitting here or online. But to give you a little bit of a sense from my perspective, I think one kind of altruistic way is that I like to think about why one might pursue graduate work is that it helps you to kind of research about new knowledge and to just better understand how the world works, right? Because you're trying to figure out something new that no one knew before, right? Something you can't read in a textbook. And in terms of our department in particular, well, one of its virtues is that U of T has the only EEB department in Canada, and we really have an amazing and huge depth of expertise in pretty much any topic in the discipline that you can think about. And of course, at U of T, our facilities are really great, especially when you think about Canada, but also internationally. So what might you do with a master's or a PhD degree? Well, I mean, you get a whole slew of different possible translatable skills, whether you want to pursue a career that's kind of on an academic trajectory, or to work in industry, or to work in consulting or government or NGOs. There are all sorts of things. And these guys may be able to tell you a little bit about some of the kind of things that they do. But so for example, getting really hands-on practical experience in data analysis, whether it's computational or statistical or mathematical. Many of our labs have access to big biological data sets of different kinds, whether it's genomic or working with remote sensing data or museum collections associated with the ROM. You really dive into thinking about how to solve problems and how to identify a problem that's worth figuring out the answer to, figuring out how to get the answer, and then actually obtaining a result that addresses that thing. Right? So how to think creatively about science, plan things, work with teams. If any of you have had research experience already, you may have had the experience of kind of working as part of a group towards a common goal. And in doing like a master's or PhD, that goal can be fairly big in scope. And of course, a key part of doing grad work is you have to produce a thesis at the end, which is like a scholarly body of writing that you would present orally in front of people to try and communicate things. Some of our graduate students get really excited about science communication and sort of develop that as like its own little niche pathway as well. I think one of the things that really motivated me to do graduate work was the idea of being able to travel around and just experience different things in different places. So a number of our students do field studies, either here in Canada, whether it's in the Arctic or locally around Southern Ontario, or in the US or South America or Asia, all over the place. If doing that kind of thing isn't really your jam, well, you can also get into experiments, whether in the lab or in the greenhouses that are on the roof, or at the Coffler Scientific Reserve, which is a field station just north of town near Newmarket that people can do experimental studies at. And even if you're not actively doing research in sort of some distant or remote place, typically researchers, grad students included, have the chance to travel internationally to go to conferences to communicate their research to a broader community of people. And so that's a really cool kind of experience too. Okay, so for our program, really what we're trying to do, our goal is to develop scientists who are thoughtful, that are versatile, that can excel at all these kind of things that I sort of talked about, that are the sorts of skills that you can gain in graduate school. And we kind of see this as kind of part of our remit to train the next generation of scientists, because we see there are a whole lot of challenges in society, whether we're talking about just acquisition of basic knowledge to applied problems in climate change or other areas that can really benefit from a training in these disciplines. I alluded to like a huge diversity of different research possibilities. I've got just 3 vignettes of 3 different junior profs that we have in the department illustrated here. Professor Tomo Parents-Fukuchi. So he's really doing kind of paleobiology and kind of a mix of kind of computational and analytical approaches. Selena Baines does a kind of a mixture of kind of field work as well as experimental studies, thinking about how we can kind of understand different aspects of dispersal in particular. And Professor Jacqueline Stepanitz is a quantitative geneticist, so she mostly works with these Drosophila fruit flies, usually not Drosophila melanogaster, but one of the species she works on is actually an important agricultural crop pest, but she's kind of studying some fundamental aspects of their evolutionary genetics. So those are just a very small sampling, a very small sampling of diversity. A few practical things. In terms of deadlines, well, the application portal is now open for our department, and I presume for many other departments here at U of T. The deadlines are for Canadian applicants January 8th. That's for both master's and PhD. For international applicants that are applying to the doctoral stream, the deadline is December 9th. I should say sometimes our students will start in September. Others times they'll start in January of that same academic year. But the admission deadline is the same in both cases. Let's see, I should say that those deadlines will immediately start reviewing applications. And so it's definitely good to kind of get applications in by those deadlines to be considered in the first round. If we don't fill all our spots, then it will be admission on a rolling basis, but there's no guarantee about those later kinds of dates. One thing you might want to keep in on your radar is coming up very soon, December 2nd, is a deadline for applying for the CGSM, the Canada Graduate Scholarship for masters from NSER, which is a competitive award, which is a great thing to consider. So how do you go about applying? So I can tell you kind of how it works in our department. in my experience, is very similar in other departments and other universities, so this should be pretty generally applicable. So typically you have to submit a statement of interest, a transcript, usually 2 reference letters. And in our department also, you need to have a faculty sponsor who is willing to supervise your research if you're admitted, okay? So what the statement is it's not really like a personal statement like your life story and, you know, that kind of thing. It's more kind of summarizing your academic experiences and background and what your motivations are for pursuing graduate school, what kind of research topics you think you might be interested in pursuing, and if there's, you know, 1, 2, 3 faculty supervisors that you're interested in maybe working with in the department. Let's see. So I think probably given the list that is sent out to you, probably have all are kind of biology or life science students of some flavor. But so that's kind of typically expected. Occasionally we have students that are a little bit more heavy, say in like the math background or something, depending on the supervisor that they plan to work with. We generally advise that students will have had some research experience in their undergrad, and that can take the form. There are many different possible forms that can take. Some of the common things here at U of T are like doing an ROP, a Research Opportunity Program course, or our 4th year EEB 498 research project course, but also things like a summer NSERC USRA or UTEA or something like that also is kind of equivalent. There are there may be some kinds of field courses that might have practical relevance, but really kind of the more experience you have, the more you know what you'd be getting into in graduate school, right? Like it would give you kind of a sense of what the flavor would be like. The other thing that you should really do or think about doing is kind of reviewing the research profiles of different faculty and then reach out to them by email to see if they're interested in kind of considering new graduate students in their lab. Maybe you do a little interview. You could visit them and talk to them to hear about what kinds of projects they're doing. You might be able to meet with current graduate students that they have in their lab to get a sense of what the vibe is like. And that's pretty important because to be admitted, not only do you have to meet the criteria of like, you know, grades or background and that kind of thing, but you have to have, because a faculty supervisor is financially contributing off of their grant to support their graduate students, you have to have an individual who would be willing to take on that mentorship role to admit you. So that's a little bit different. So for example, the university where I did my PhD in the US, they had rotations. So you'd kind of come in with a temporary supervisor, but then you would kind of finalize that in your first year. And so, but we don't have that system in our department. I'd also encourage you to talk to your TAs. Like I said, they're typically graduate students in our department, and they can give you a really good sense of, even if their work isn't exactly what you're interested in, they may know other people who are. Let's see, and then there's some links that you can find for some of the nitty-gritty details, but we could also talk about that if you like as well. So I'll come back to this, but when we switch over to our kind of panelists here, but the EEB Undergrad Student Union asked me to also mention that next week they're going to be having like a discussion coffee with grad students. So if between now and then, if you have some additional questions or want to know what the experience is of being a graduate student from some other people, these are some other really great graduate students in our department, in addition to the ones we have today, from a few different labs. So Sarah's in the Lujan lab at the ROM. Meta is a kind of theoretician here in Matt Osman and Nicole Medeo's lab. And Noam's a grad student based at UTM, and Peter Kotenen's lab doing, I think, more kind of field ecology kind of work. So a nice spectrum of different things. Okay, so I think that's kind of the run through that I hoped would give you a little bit of a backdrop of maybe kind of what to expect. I've kind of populated this with a few kinds of questions that may crop up, but maybe now I could get the four of you to come up and introduce
Do you want to
yourselves.
check if there's any online questions?
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question that I mentioned, grad appointments at the ROM. Where would I go to learn about which labs at the ROM are taking on new students? So fortunately, thanks for that question. Fortunately, the faculty that are based at the ROM are just listed on our EEB faculty page. So if you go to the department webpage, think people, and then you can click faculty, and then you can even sort it by campus and things like that. But they should be listed there. And I think there's a little icon that will say whether people are considering new students as well. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll let each of you maybe introduce yourselves and you can tell us a little bit about like what your current, like very briefly, like what lab you're in and what research you're doing. And if you have like any initial thoughts for what you were thinking about when you were applying to grad school. Start with you, Jesse.
I'm Jessie. I'm currently in my third year of my PhD. I work with Megan Frederickson, where I look at interactions between duckweed, an aquatic plant, and its microbiome. I was an undergrad here at U of T, and I went direct entry from undergrad to PhD. In my undergrad, I did double major in EEB and molecular genetics. And sort of when I was considering grad school, is in my fourth year, I wasn't thinking about doing a fourth year research project. I really just wanted to talk with Megan because I was thinking about joining her lab. And then sort of from talking with her is how I got more insight into the grad school application process.
Hi everyone, my name is Lisa and I'm a third year PhD student in the Bond Trigger Lab. And I look at the processes that impact the timing of life history transitions in plant species. So I do this through greenhouse work, growth chambers, and I also am starting to do work up at the Kotler Research Reserve, so KSR. And for me, for graduate school, it was kind of like this black box for me my senior year. Everyone talked about it, but they didn't really talk about how you actually contact professors, how you actually go through the application process, what it looks like afterwards. I luckily had a really great research mentor during my third and fourth year of undergrad who guided me more throughout that process. And I applied to 3 different places, one in the US. I'm American, so I was thinking in the US, one in the UK, and also here. And I thought a lot about the fact that I wanted to be an international student. I really wanted that experience in grad school, but I also didn't want to be too far away from my family. Being close to my family is very important for me. And so luckily with Toronto, it's kind of best of both worlds. I'm in Canada, but I'm also a 2-hour flight home if I need to see my parents. And also I'm in the same time zone as them, which is pretty nice. And my mentor actually was in this department. She got her PhD here. And so I was a little bit biased when there was a position opened up in Megan Fondringer's lab. So I just decided to come here so I could be a little bit more like my research mentor.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan. I'm a second-year master's student in Niall Rawlinson's lab. I study salamanders in Algonquin Park, but more specifically, I look at their survival and how it relates to year-to-year temperature of the previous season. And so I went to Queen's for undergrad, and I did my first intro to research was a fourth-year thesis, and I was looking at trilling chorus frog bioacoustics, and so it was really cool to go through the process and look at something to do with sort of animal communication and advertisement call evolution, but I really wanted field work. That was a real priority when going into graduate school. So I only really considered labs that would give me a substantial amount of field work. And thankfully, where I am now, I was able to I've already done 3 months out in Algonquin Park, which it's funny because my thesis is done using long-term data. But to continue the studies, we go out every year to collect that data. So it wasn't really directly contributing towards my thesis, but it was contributing towards the maintenance of these long-term projects. But I find it really cool because grad school teaches you how to be a really good scientist, but to be if being a naturalist is also very important to you, then you only learn that from being out in the field. And so that was a huge priority when applying to grad school for me. And also I kind of applied super late. And so I served more on this panel, I guess, as a cautionary tale on what maybe not to do when applying for grad school, but it seemed to work out. I'm pretty happy with where I landed, so.
I'm Martin. I'm a first year master's student in John Stinchcombe's lab. And I actually did my undergrad at UBC in natural resource conservation and forestry. So I didn't have a necessarily a biology degree, but just through working in a lab and getting to get exposed to stuff that way, I realized I was really interested in plant genetics. But when I was looking for places to apply, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in forestry specifically. That was my initial goal, but everyone I emailed was retiring. So I kind of switched gears and I was thinking more along the lines of maybe I should get more like foundational like biology experience. So I switched gears and I found this department through talking with my undergraduate mentor and spoke with actually Megan Bontrager first, but then pivoted to talking to John a little bit more because our research interests lined up. So yeah. Oh, and I'm looking at the genetic basis for a leaf shape in ivy leaf morning glory.
All right, very cool. Thank you. So maybe before we take any questions here, there's one more in the chat, which I think maybe you four might be better placed to answer than me. This person's asking, how different is the experience at UTM versus the St. George campus? Is there much collaboration between faculty at the two campuses, or is UTM quite disjointed?
I guess the short answer is there can be. It kind of depends on how much the faculty want to interact as well as the student. Certainly I have friends at UTM who do make the effort to like try to interact with folks downtown, and vice versa. I've also been to UTM, like much more recently, I took the shuttle to go support a friend who was doing their appraisal talk. But there can be a lot of crosstalk, but you kind of need to have effort being put in from both sides.
I will say before coming here, I kind of thought that each campus was almost like its own university because at UBC, there's UBC Vancouver and UBC Okanagan, and they're basically their own universities. So I thought it was that way, but there is a lot more interaction than I thought. So
yeah, I think it depends kind of the time scale over which you think things too. So for example, we have this kind of tri-campus colloquium every spring, typically in April, called the Atwood Colloquium. So Margaret Atwood's dad actually used to be a professor of forest entomology here at U of T. And so their family kind of endowed this thing that we now have as this really great event that kind of where we bring in like a super special speaker and a couple of rising star researchers from other universities, and then but most of the day and a half of this little mini conference are presentations of research by graduate students and postdocs and usually a few faculty, but usually mostly graduate students and postdocs from all the three campuses. And so that's a way for the three campuses to really come together. I certainly, right now, one of my PhD students has a professor from UTM as a member of their supervisory committee. And so that's another way you can get that crosstalk and interaction as well. Probably stuff at KSR at the field station. There's some cross-fertilization there because it doesn't matter where your campus is based. Let's see, maybe before I go back to the chat questions, does anybody in the room have anything? Yes.
Did you have for applying?
How much research experience did you have for applying?
I think I should go last. I think you should go first, right?
So I worked as a research assistant for 2 summers during my undergrad. So at the end of my second year, I helped collect data on a common garden experiment with PhD and a master's student. And then in my third year, I got to collect data to use towards my own undergraduate project, just reusing the plants that we had from the common garden. But then after that, I kind of switched gears and I worked in herbarium for I volunteered and then I worked in a herbarium. So still exposed to research, but not necessarily like conducting it myself.
Yeah, so I did undergrad through like the height of COVID, and all of my summers were also like not available. So I didn't do a whole lot of research in undergrad until my fourth year thesis. So my fourth year thesis was really like an intro to research, and I didn't really like I collected my own data in the sense that I was listening to frog calls and then getting like extracting the data from the recordings, but I didn't go out and record frogs myself or anything like that. And again, fieldwork was like a huge priority for me. So in some ways, I really came into grad school with kind of not so much in terms of research experience, just I knew the general way on how it was conducted based on my thesis.
I was really privileged that I was able to go to a really small liberal arts college in North Carolina for my undergrad. It only had 2,000 students, which is the same enrollment in like Bio 120 here. And so because of that, there are no graduate students at this university. So it meant that undergrads were at the forefront of any sort of research that happened there. And so I was able to start research my sophomore year. I started in entomology, and then I moved on to working with plants my third and my fourth year. However, I want to say that that was like that was kind of expected when you went to that university, but that's not always the case for when you are actually applying for graduate school. You normally want to have some sort of research experience. But it can be through just working in a lab as a work study student all the way up to doing some sort of guided research. Right now in the lab that I'm in currently, I'm co-mentoring some undergrad students, and they have just the same amount of capability that I had going into grad school. They just may not have had the opportunities starting in their first and second year to get into research. And so I would not discount your ability and your impact that you can have as a graduate student based on what you were able to do during your undergrad, if that kind of makes sense. I hope that there's not like an increase in stress in the room as we're all explaining like our research background. As long as you have some sort of experience to like any sort of degree, you can definitely apply to grad school and be very, very successful in that.
Yeah, I wanted to go last because I think I came in with a lot of undergrad research experience, and I didn't want anyone to feel very intimidated. That was in part because it was a very ambitious undergrad, and I took advantage of a lot of the programs that U of T has to offer. So things like Ash already mentioned, like I did an RP, I did several USRAs, project courses, things like that. But a lot of that was like through luck and through persistence, and sort of yeah, you want to like just apply for things. And then once you get one, it kind of is easier to move on from there. I will say now too, sort of what Louisa was saying earlier, as a grad student, I am more directly involved when it comes to, for instance, hiring work studies or interviewing undergrads that we take on for project students. And I do try to keep in the mentality of like, not everyone's going to come in with like having as much like prior experience, but let's like talk to them. Let's see, you know, what are their interests? Does it align with the lab? It doesn't really matter how much prior experience you have. But for me, it's more about like, does an undergrad seem like they really want to be here and seem like they're going to show up? And that's probably the most important part, is just applying for those opportunities and trying to get that experience beforehand, even if it's just like through volunteering or like initially as a work study. I think it's really important to seek out those opportunities.
Yeah, I might just chime in a little bit too and say, I mean, I think we happen to have a cross section of students that have maybe more research experience from their undergrad than is typical, maybe. But part of the reason it is helpful to try and get some research experiences in undergrad is not to like tick a box to make you like eligible for entry or something. It's more actually for yourself, like, is this actually something you're going to like doing? So I've had some undergrad researchers come in my lab, and part of what it helped them learn about themselves was that they did not want to do research, right? And so that's like an important lesson to learn. And I think one of the things that you heard from these guys is they had some early experience and were turned on to it and like wanted to keep doing it, right? And so and it's hard to know that without actually doing it hands-on, because it's a totally different way of learning It's very much a self-motivated way of learning because it's not like you're on your own, but there is an expectation that you're going to like work to troubleshoot things and try and figure stuff out for yourself to some degree. I mean, guided and helped, but it's not like there are all the answers in a textbook that you can just read and learn it that way. So, and I think for some students, that can be really intimidating. And I know at least one case I remember in undergrad just feeling like it was like too much to know that the answer was not known. Like that was just like too much. And for other people, that's like really exciting because you get to like discover something new that even if in some small way, no one knew before. So.
Oh, and I also wanted to quickly add that for at least in my undergrad and also for the lab that I'm in, we don't expect students to be emailing us, telling us the exact project that they're going to work on. That's not a requirement for conducting research, especially as an undergrad. Instead, we look more for enthusiasm and capability of the student. And we work with that student to come up with a research question that both the lab would like to answer and also that the student can kind of alter and modify a little bit into like the interests that they actually want. Like I know that we have had one student worked as a work study student with me on one of my common garden experiments. She fell in love with the color variation of Clarkia pulchella, which is one of the species that we look at. And I was like, cool, I don't know anything about the coloration in this species. Do you want to look at it? And we talked about it more, and she did a 397 in our lab that actually she just grew up a bunch more Clarkia and learned a bunch of different skills on how to actually quantify and analyze color variation. And so that was like one example that just as a work study student or just working with a graduate student, you're interested in something. And then normally then when you apply, your professor that you're talking to, as well as the graduate students who are involved, will help you actually formulate your question. It's the same thing for grad school. I had no idea what I was going to study when I applied. I just knew I liked plants and I wanted to do something with plants. And that was it.
That was similar to me as well. Two things. One is I wanted to work with plants, but I also knew that I wanted to actually have something hands-on. So whether it was either field work or greenhouse stuff. And so when talking with my, like just first meeting with my supervisor, I was like, these are my goals. Like, how can we like, how can that like be incorporated into like the goals of the lab? And so that's kind of how we massaged the project. Because I knew I didn't want to just do like computational stuff for sure. But I didn't care about like what species it was. I was like just any old plant is fine by me. The second thing is that when I was in my undergrad, a lot of forestry students did co-op. Forestry students and also some of my friends were in environmental science. And a lot of people did like their first term as like a research assistant. And they're like, I'm out. I don't want to do this anymore. So the next co-op term, they did something else. Whereas for me, my first term was a research assistant. I loved it so much, I ditched co-op and I just did that instead. So research, like it's good to try it, but a lot of the friends I had, like they tried it and they realized that they enjoyed other things instead. So you don't feel like you have to enjoy it, but it's nice to try.
Yeah, I guess
Maybe can I just jump in? There's a question in the chat that kind of ties into this a little bit, where the person's asking, if you take a few years break between undergrad and master's, do you have the same application process? Yes. And I will also, maybe as an anecdote that ties into what we've just been discussing. So my current master's student, Ariel, she did her undergrad at Queens, and her last 2 years were kind of during that pandemic lockdown period where she couldn't really get research experience like effectively. And so she did a bunch of like tree planting out west and north somewhere. And she also did like a certificate program in some kind of data science or machine learning thing at Ryerson. And so she didn't have like an ROP or that kind of research project experience, but she had kind of gained these other skills and tenacity after her undergrad. So when she applied to me to work with me, like that kind of impressed me as something that, she's had a couple of years since her undergrad to really think about what she hoped to get out of graduate school and had some skills that actually turned out to be able to like plug in a really cool way to this project that she's currently doing, where she's using like, you know, some of these really new machine learning image segmentation techniques. Like I think the latest, it was like one of them was released like 2 weeks ago from Facebook that allows her to like process these electron microscopy images and create like volumetric space quantification of these cells and things. And so it's like taking this really cool like statistical computational approach to address an evolutionary question in a way that kind of matches some of the things that she actually got after undergrad. Anyway, sorry, I don't know if other folks have other things who wanted to chime in with Dylan. I think you were gonna say.
Yeah, I was just going to contrast a little bit to, I guess, like for just to contrast the sort of research interests. I also like, I love field work. I'm also very interested in the computational aspect of things. So it's kind of like you don't have to just be in one field or the other. For me, I find I'm both. Like when I'm not in the field, I'm at a desk and I'm typing away, coding away. And yeah, what I also didn't have the skills and sort of computational stuff that I'm doing now beforehand. I knew nothing about Bayesian statistics, a whole other branch of statistics they don't really go into in undergrad. And so I found myself like at the base of this like vast sort of set of a different way to think about statistics and probability. But once you get a hang of it and start learning about it, I found it like super interesting. And so like you can also diversify yourself, and you know, if multiple things interest you, you can find ways to incorporate those multiple things into your project as well.
Yeah, like when I started grad school, I mean, I had these various undergrad experiences, but Megan's always been like, let's think about projects not just in terms of research interests, but what skills do you want to learn? So for instance, like I want to be able to do a lot more computational work. So we've been talking about how can we incorporate more sequencing work. Wanted to gain some more field experience. So how can we set up like a field experiment that helps me to gain those skills, you know, within still broad research interest of plant microbe interactions, but there's a lot of ways that you can research an area that you're interested in that you're not expected to already come in with all the skills.
Yeah, any questions?
I care about field work the most as well. And I'm a little worried that my needs to be outside won't be always fulfilled by grad school. How much of your time do you spend on a desk, and how much is it outside or doing things that you love around nature, and how fulfilling is that?
I can comment on that. I mean, grad school at the end of the day, it's a lot of sitting at a desk and typing away, but there's a huge variety there in terms of people's fieldwork. Like some people can go, like you have international fieldwork. I've heard some stories of people who for their PhDs, they go for like 6 months to Africa and study something specifically there, in which case you're outside every single day, I bet. For me, I do my work at the Algonquin Wildlife Research Station, which is 4 hours north of here. And when I'm up there, Like it's all I'm doing, and day out, just on the same ponds, same like lake systems, looking at turtles or salamanders. But yeah, when most of the year I am here and I'm at my desk, either reading or modeling, like figuring out how to incorporate the data. And so it is a lot of sitting at a desk as well. So.
It kind of depends on how you express your needs to your supervisor as well. Like I know for me, I'm happiest when I'm outside of the city and I'm staring at plants. And so for me, when I was doing work with greenhouses, it was really nice to just be up on the roof and be able to be just looking at pretty plants all day. But then after that, I spent a lot of time at a desk trying to analyze the data. And last spring, I told Megan that I was like, if I stay one more week in Toronto, I'm going to lose my mind. And so she said, great, I have an undergrad who really wants to do work at KSR during May. I'm going to send you up there with her so you can just co-mentor and co-supervise her. So there's just like another person up there. And also, I was privileged enough that she had some money that could send me up there and house me there. So I could just walk around and just be like a naturalist for a month and just see what was going on up there. And based off of that, I was then inspired for what I'm going to be doing in my 4th chapter of my PhD with trout lily, which is a really fun species up there. And so a lot of that was me needing to actually talk with my supervisor and express that that was really a need that I had. And so for the rest of my PhD, it's looking like for about half of the year, I'm in Toronto and I'm either working in one of the spaces in here and I'm also on the computer doing stuff that I need to do. But then also for then some of the year, I'm actually at KSR full time. And I will say also the really great thing about this department is KSR is just like a 1 hour drive north of here. And so I normally hitch a ride with either John Stinchcombe or other people who are going up there and I just work there. Right now, they're also undergoing some really huge renovations and there's going to be like a brand new like state of the art like research hub there, which I'm super excited to take advantage of next year. And I'll just sometimes go up there and I'll just work up there because they have Wi-Fi. It's not like completely away from life. Yeah, and so I'll also do that just on like around things while I'm working. And also like in your PhD or your master's, it's a job. And so you also need to be thinking about your work-life balance with that. And so it shouldn't be that you are like at your desk like 12 hours or more a day. You should be able to find some sort of balance with that. And so I know for me, part of the balance is making sure that I'm gardening, I'm hiking, I'm doing some stuff that's just gonna like relax me with that. Yeah.
I concur with all of that. It's like I went fishing last weekend because I was like, I just want to be outside. And I made friends with two people who really like fish, so they took me to find some fish.
We've got a few more questions in the chat. Are there any more in the room before I switch over to that? Maybe we can, we're already close to one, so maybe we'll try and do speed round on these. So one is, what is co-supervision like? See, none of you guys are co-supervised, is that right? But, or maybe I'll just briefly chime in on co-supervision. So if it turns out, so some of our faculty have a lot of collaboration between them and have a number of students over the years that are co-supervised. So some common pairings are John Stinchcombe and Stephen Wright, John Stinchcombe and Megan Fredrickson. And there's a number of other permutations I'm not going to bother to go into. I've co-supervised one student in the past, and actually the other supervisor was a prof in the physics department. And so co-supervision doesn't necessarily have to be two profs within EEB proper, but usually it is. So if that's if your interests kind of fall between two people, just, you know, when you try and talk with them, ask if that might be an option and how it might work. It does make scheduling meetings a little more complicated because it's like the more bodies in the room.
It's also possible to be like co-supervised on a project, like if you're thinking about long-term PhD. Megan and I have been talking about but potentially doing some more work that is a little bit beyond her area of expertise. So bringing someone on specifically for that project, for that chapter, and not necessarily the entire piece.
This next question, we've already touched on some of it, but how important is research experience in reference letters? Who should I get reference letters from? So, I mean, if you've done a undergrad research project, that supervisor is a typical person that you would ask. It's kind of like an unwritten quid pro quo that they will write a reference letter for you if they take you into their lab. But generally, anyone who generally you're looking for an academic letter of reference because you'd be applying to this academic program. And so that would typically be a professor. But if you had a research experience like, you know, at an NGO or something, like maybe there's someone there and maybe they even themselves have a master's or PhD and would also be like a good candidate for that. But if you don't have research experience or, you know, you typically need 2 letters. So other common things, like if you've taken a field course, that's like a small intimate setting where a prof gets to know you individually. Let's see, or if you've done a work study position in a lab. Yeah, Martin.
So I had my one supervisor, who's my first reference, and then I took an extra statistics course, and I didn't go into this course being like, I'm going to get a good reference out of this, but I ended up developing a really good relationship with this professor because I was I needed this statistics class to help with my thesis. So I like talked with her a lot and she helped me with a lot of things. So at the end, she made a really good reference because she got to know like my research interest and also like knew that I was good at what I was doing. So that kind of just happened that way. I didn't go into it knowing that I was going to get a reference.
Yeah, I think the key is that they were able to speak to your
Yes.
abilities pretty
Yeah.
specifically. So if you're in a class, even if it's a only modest sized class by U of T standards, right? If there's 50 people and all the prof knows about you are what grades you got on the term tests, that's not going to make for a compelling reference letter. So it's really someone who can speak to your abilities is kind of what you're looking for there.
And I wanted to add for the research experience, kind of repeating what I had said before, you're a lot more experienced than you give yourself credit for. I know that when I was applying for grad school, you guys already know the experience that I had. I suffered from a lot of imposter syndrome. I still do. And when I was applying, I thought that I was going to be sneaky and just be like, you're not going to take me as a grad student, but what about a lab technician? And then from the conversations I actually had with graduate advisors, they then said, no, you need to apply for grad school. And so when you guys are coming up with your applications and also your reference letters, just remember that University of Toronto is a pressure cooker for a lot of students here. And you have done just really, really incredible work up to this point. And this is like another kind of like exciting step in your journey as a researcher.
So if you want other research experience without doing independent projects or things like that, lab courses are a great way. Lab courses beyond like Bio 120, 220 is what I mean. So for instance, I took this whole genome sequencing lab course that's offered by Mogen. And honestly, that was really great for helping me realize that I would like to do more like bioinformatics related work, and also that I really liked microbiology. And then through that, like through those kinds of courses, you can also learn a lot about yourself doing research without having done like an independent research project. And when we're interviewing students and I see that they've taken like similar lab courses and they write like, this is the kind of skill I learned, this is what I did, it also kind of sets them apart in my mind.
And some programs also ask for a non-supervisory reference letter. I didn't know this, but I'm currently writing a reference letter for an undergraduate in my lab.
Yeah.
Because they need both like the supervisor to write a reference letter, but also like a grad student or someone who's not the supervisor. So you can also just be getting to know like your TA or the grad students who are in your lab, and there might be a way that they can actually either write your reference letter in total, but they can also help to write the reference letter that the supervisor writes, because it might be that you're not actually developing the closest relationship with the supervisor, but the grad student can actually then write most of the letter, and then the supervisor can like add some stuff and then be the one that signs off.
Yeah, I've had, depending on the professor, they might ask like, have you interacted with your TA? Like I've been asked to give input on undergrads that like my supervisor may not have had the most direct interactions with, but like by asking me and sort of my experience, she was able to write a more informed letter. They might write like, the student worked closely with my graduate student X, who had this to say about the student, and then they might just literally copy paste what the grad student wrote about that undergrad.
Yeah, this last question I think ties right into what Jesse and Louisa were just saying. So applying for NSERC applications, I think ideally it would probably be a prof who is writing those. But if you've been working closely with a grad student or a TA, you might see if basically they and the prof could kind of collaborate on the letter itself.
And that also makes the reference letter even stronger, because it's basically like a reference letter from two people, which is also really great.
All right, maybe there's one more here in the chat, which is, how is the job outlook for EEB research-based masters in or outside of academia? So, I mean, I guess I'll start with a couple things related to that. One, there are a lot of jobs for which these days, like a master's is kind of like the bar for entry for even really being able to be considered for the job. And so for better or worse, like a bachelor's may not actually be enough to really make it into the pool that is being seriously considered for a lot of science related jobs. So that's one kind of answer. A second kind of answer is that I think sometimes people get a little bit hung up on is like you're doing a master's or PhD is not like a vocational training, right? You're actually learning a fairly broad set of transferable skills. You're learning how to like solve problems, and that can be kind of applied to all sorts of different things. So it's not like the details of your research thesis you're going to get a job in. It's more like the stuff you do to figure out how to do your thesis is like all these kind of tools in your toolbox that you can then bring to whatever kind of job. So, I mean, one of our former graduates that I know, I think she first did a master's and then got a job working at the Royal Botanic Garden here in Ontario. And then she came back, did a PhD, and like I think she had a kid during grad school and other kinds of things. And after getting a PhD, got a job working at, I think it's CIBC, working for their like detecting like, you know, financial crime division, because she like or fraud or whatever. And because she became really expert in kind of statistical analysis of big data. And so banks work with big data. And so she's kind of mining it for anomalies and things like that.
Like Georgia went to work for a publishing house.
Yes. There's like, I mean, so I think one thing, so what Jesse's getting at is that there are like all sorts of jobs that frankly, most of us don't even know really exist that you can gain skills in to be suitable for. Sometimes within life sciences, like directly related to what you do as research, and sometimes not. Sometimes a little bit tangential. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but let's see. Other questions? I've been kind of looking at the chat thing here. I don't know if folks in the room have any last things before we kind of wrap up. Yes.
Actually, I have a question. It's a more like logistical when you were talking about the last 2 years of grades that are considered. Do you guys consider the grades from this winter semester like applying for the January 8th deadline, or is it the last 2 years from like before this semester?
So usually the decisions get made like in January or February. So it's not going to consider the winter term grades. Yeah.
And that deadline, like the first deadline in January, are admissions considered on a rolling basis before then? Like, does it matter how early you submit it before January, or as long as it's by that date?
Yeah, as long as it's by that date, it can be helpful to kind of submit it a bit early if you're the kind of person that helps make sure that you're like talking to different faculty about options. And it may be that you reach out to a prof and say, hey, I'm really interested in the kind of research that you do. I'm interested in applying, and they may say they're not really up for sponsoring your application, and that may be for many reasons that have nothing to do with you, right? It may be that their grant is tapped out and they financially cannot support any more students. It could be they're going to be on sabbatical the next year and they can't in good conscience take on a master's student where they're going to be, you know, in Australia and not be able to like, you know, mentor them effectively, right? Or they may just have, you know, Louisa mentioned work-life balance. Maybe they've got other stuff going on in their life that they just are not able to like take on additional mentorship responsibilities. And so there are a lot of reasons that are kind of unrelated to your quality as an applicant that, so try not to like take it personally and try not to be disheartened if that's something that comes about.
So I have some additional things to say on the application process. When I was like reaching out to profs, I did it super late, like in the winter. And with Niall, actually, he originally told me when I messaged him in like December, it doesn't look like it's going to be possible. He didn't apply for an NSERC, which I didn't even know existed at the time. And he's like, talk to me in February. And by that point, I already had to apply. So I was talking to other U of T profs as well. So I put all of their names. I had like three names into my like statement of interest for my grad application, including Niall's name, and I haven't even spoken to him yet. And then it was only like in February that I actually had a conversation with him and where it seemed likely that he was going to take me on. So even if you don't have like a straight answer from someone, but you still want to keep that door open, if they didn't fully close it for you, still it's worthwhile putting their name in there. That way you still have that option if they change their mind.
if we're giving additional advice, the best thing that I heard when I was applying for grad school is to pick somewhere that you're going to be happy. That can mean a lot of things. So for me, I'm originally from Toronto and I haven't left far from home. But in part, like it's good to consider someone who aligns with your research interests, but really try to like talk to them to see if they're the right supervisor for you. Because ideally the right supervisor for you will like support your growth both as a student, but also as a person. Try to see if you can talk with the grad students, either current or former. It's a really good sign, especially if they encourage you to talk to their students, because it probably means they have nothing to hide. Yeah, like also consider like finances, like, you know, if you're trying to move elsewhere, like I considered Florida for a really long time, like is it going to be financially stable for you? And yeah, also like Ashley was mentioning with the whole TA stuff, I didn't realize this until I was considering schools in the US, but we're really lucky to be unionized here, and there are caps and rules and all that about how much you can actually work.
Yeah, your supervisor matters.
Yeah.
Just because you're a great researcher doesn't mean you're a decent human being. And so you should be picking a supervisor who is going to be in your corner during your PhD. They're going to see you at your best and at your worst. And you want someone who will actually support you and help you through all of that. And that comes from actually talking with your supervisor and talking with the other students who are in that lab.
I asked kind of how John's supervisory style was, and kind of wanted to see like if that would line up. I know one of my friends is in a lab where they expected to be in the office 9 to 5 every day, and like they check to see like where you are. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember I had a meeting with someone who clearly was not interested in talking with me, where I was like, why did you even agree to meet with me?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely try to like set up a Zoom meeting or some kind of meeting with them, like even if it's briefly, to see like what they're expecting to from a grad student.
I had a meeting with someone who is retiring, but he still said he wanted to talk with me anyways, just to talk about plants. So that was nice.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up. Thanks everybody for coming. If you have additional kind of questions that pop into mind, feel free to send a message to me or the grad office. Or there is that EEB event next week that you're encouraged and welcome to attend. So thanks for coming.
Cool. How are y'all doing? Pretty good. Yeah, a little stressed out. Understandable. How's it going? Hi.